Here's the trap. You fall in love with a house in summer. It's bright, it's breezy, it feels perfect. But come winter, the same house can turn into a dark, cold icebox with drafts whistling through every crack. Aspect, wind and insulation change how a home feels completely from season to season.
And it's not just a house. Insects, mossies, even tourists can make your dream location feel very different depending on the time of year. That quiet beach street in June might be a car park in January. If you want to buy smart, you've got to think about how a property lives year round.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to become educated home buyers.
I'm Veronica and that was Meighan. We are two of Australia's most experienced buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum, which is a good thing because between us, we've got almost 50 years experience to share with you, and together we're going to cut through the BS and make sure that you're well informed so you make better decisions.
Now, when you get to the end of this episode, make sure you check out the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. Take a look at our course for first home buyers.
We've created an easy-to-follow course that builds on all of our professional experience to take you step by step through the whole home buying journey.
You'll know exactly what to do, when to do it, and be able to find your first home faster and easier with our guidance along the way.
It's the next best thing to having your very own buyer's agent.
Now, before we get into the interesting stuff, in this week's episode, there's the boring bit to do, and that's the disclaimer.
You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes their time to personally understand your situation. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors, or both, to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about how the seasons can trick you when you're buying your first home and what you need to look for so you don't regret it later.
This is a small part of step 4 in the PACE system. So PACE, if you remember, is preparation, action, commitment, execution. Step 4 is part of action. And that is module 4 in our 10 steps to buy a property. It's called search and inspect. So when we're out there searching and inspecting, this is some of the stuff you need to be thinking about around seasonality.
Absolutely. Now, most first home buyers walk through a property once, maybe twice, if you're lucky, and often in the same season.
Sometimes the same day.
That's right. The problem is houses behave really differently depending on the time of the year and also time of day. A place that's breezy and cool in summer might actually be absolutely freezing and drafty in winter. If you don't think through the year-round experience, you could end up with a home that's uncomfortable and perhaps expensive to run.
Absolutely. And you got to think about it, right? People who are selling houses, both the agents and the owners, they're thinking, when is the best time? When does my property look the best? And what time of day, even right down to what time of day does it look the best to have the open house? So, of course, they're going to choose the most advantageous season. And you as a buyer are not even going to be able to think. You're not even going to be thinking about what comes in the opposite. So you got to remember that buying a property isn't like buying a new outfit that you can return if it doesn't fit. You're committing for the long haul, so you need to imagine how it will feel in every season. And so we're going to run through the big things to think about: the aspect, heat and light, cooling too, if you think about it, wind, insects, even tourists if you're near the coast, and of course how heating, cooling and insulation play into all of this.
All right, let's kick off with aspect, light and heat. So aspect is probably, I think, the biggest one. In summer, a west-facing living room can feel like an oven in the late afternoon. I know. I owned a house for 11 years that had a western rear. It was my compromise to live in the suburb that I wanted to live in. But I was conscious of it. I was aware of it and I made compromises for it. But in winter, that very same room gave us a really lovely warm light, and it was actually really beautiful in the afternoon. Whereas a north-facing living spaces, particularly in, pretty much across Australia actually, because we get that southern sun in the north of the sky, it's usually the sweet spot. But even then you want to think about how much glass is there, what the shading's like, and whether you're going to be too hot or too cold, depending on which part of the country you live in.
Yeah, and it does change. I mean, obviously, that west-facing living room is more of an issue in Queensland than it is in Victoria. But it's not just about temperature, it's about lifestyle as well. There's sunny deck that's great in summer might be completely unusable in winter if it's facing south and you're just getting the southerly buster in there. And actually, southerly buster's a summer thing. But in winter, when there's driving rains and the freezing winds off the Alps. So you do have to be thinking about all the things that work well in one season. Do they work across the year, right? So you might buy a home that you're thinking it's flooded with natural light and you realize in winter the sun angle changes and your living space is suddenly quite dark. And it's why we always encourage buyers to pay attention to orientation, how the sun moves through a property, and think about it. It's summer now or it's winter now. What will it be at the opposite time of year? Do you know, in my home, I've got a side garden that faces north and I've got some trees out there and I get them pruned quite dramatically at the beginning of winter to allow that winter light in. And then through winter and spring, they grow up. So during summer, they actually shade my living area. So I utilize those trees to maximize the aspect. And look, my house was designed with that in mind, but you've got to be thinking about those sorts of things whenever you look at a home.
Yeah, and nothing's going to be perfect. We're not suggesting that you keep looking and looking and looking until you find the perfect northern aspect that doesn't have any shading in winter, but, has all the light. We're not suggesting. We're just simply saying that you need to keep these things in mind when you're looking, so it's not a surprise when you've got to turn the heaters on in winter or you've got to turn the air conditioning on in summer. You've just got to make the decisions and know the information before you go ahead. So let's have a look at wind and weather. This is often unpredictable, but there is some patterns sometimes. So wind is a factor that buyers often overlook. In summer, a good cross breeze is absolute gold. If you can open a door and a window at opposite ends of the property and that breeze comes through, it can be absolutely beautiful, natural cooling, doesn't cost you any money, it can save you from switching on the air conditioning. But in winter, those drafts can make the house bitterly cold, especially if the insulation isn't up to scratch. And, in some coastal areas, you'll also need to think about like salt air and storms and the impact of that. My mum and dad live near the beach, but Mum particularly won't live right near the water because she doesn't want to clean the windows all the time. For me, I'd be out there cleaning the windows to have the view, but for each person, it's a different priority.
And wind isn't something that you always notice at a Saturday open home, right? And that's where talking to neighbours or visiting the area at different times can give you a much clearer picture. A property that feels still and comfortable in March might be blasted by southerlies in July. And, I can tell you there's parts of Sydney, for example, in summer, the prevailing wind, and this is the thing, understanding how the winds change in different seasons. Prevailing wind in summer is a nor'easter, right? That gets so strong in some areas. And if you're in an apartment, for instance, it's high enough, you can get the table setting blown off your dining table.
Right.
That's how strong it can get, right? It blows furniture off balconies like at its worst, right? So if you don't know that, you're going to buy that in winter, you've got no idea. Another thing with wind, I live under the flight path. In winter, I barely hear a plane, right? Because the prevailing wind in winter means that basically other people get flight noise. In summer, however, back to that nor'easter, clearly it's good for landing planes over my house. And so I get so much more flight noise in summer. So if I'm going to sell my house, I think maybe I'll sell it in winter. Somebody who doesn't know the area very well might buy it thinking there's no flight noise here, but in summer they're going to be in for a rude shock, right?
Smart. That buyer's got to do their homework.
That's it. These are the kinds of hidden traps that first home buyers, not just first home buyers, but all home buyers who not necessarily lived in the area or even first home buyer particularly because they haven't actually paid for heating. Well, they have if they've rented, but haven't necessarily understood the ongoing costs of having the wrong orientation or a window or having to close the doors all the time instead of being able to have that cross-flow ventilation. These are things that buyers rarely think about, but they can really make or break how livable your home is.
It absolutely can. But again, if you know this when you go in and you get to winter and it's cold, you just know that you've got to turn that air conditioning on, the heating on, or you keep the doors closed during those prevailing winds. We get westerlies. We get wild westerlies up here in Brisbane in August, the echo westerlies we call them. It's wild, but it's a very short period of time. So if you were selling a house during this time, probably not the best idea. But if you were looking at a house during this time, you would just say, all right, for about 4 weeks, that's going to be pretty uncomfortable. But let me think about the orientation for the rest of the year, right? So don't just think about that time period. But let's talk about insects and nature. We love insects and nature. Well, do we? I don't know. Nature, yes. Insects, no. Summer brings out all sorts of bugs, mozzies, midges, cockroaches, ants, you name it. Bit of water. The ants are all around. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy property. They're just looking for another place to nest. But if your property's near the water or has poor drainage, you could be dealing with a mozzie invasion for months of the year. It's something you won't always see during a quick inspection, but it can affect your lifestyle massively.
Oh, yeah. God. And then you get possums, noisy bird. I get possums. I live in Newtown in inner Sydney. I get possums. Like, what the hell is that? It's woken me in the night, right? You get noisy birds, kookaburras again, this area, even fruit bats in some areas. These things can seem small, and if they're in concentrated numbers, they can drive you nuts, right, if you're not prepared.
You live near a creek, that can increase the mozzies or other insects.
Mozzies are a real issue. In fact, I was talking to a buyer's agent up in the Central Coast who was saying that there are certain suburbs that are known for their mozzie infestations. Like that's sort of local knowledge that is so, so important. So the key here is to be curious. You need to talk to people, ask the agent, talk to neighbours, look for if every property's got fly screens. If that's good. But you might be thinking, it's like when every property's got bars in the windows. That sort of tells you something, doesn't it?
It does. Either somebody went through, I grew up in Lismore, and there was door-to-door salesman that went through doing those blinds, that external
the
blinds.
roller shutters.
Yeah, roller shutters. And there was just streets and streets of houses with these roller shutters. And it was just a very effective salesman that got everybody in that street to buy those roller shutters.
Not because it's really unsafe
Not because there was any criminal activity.
But if you are sort of seeing, I don't know, if you're seeing over protection, if every house has got a mozzie zapper out the back, for example, you must be thinking, summer living might feel very different here because I might be sharing it with swarms of insects.
Or you just work out how you deal with it. So that might be the right house in the right suburb in the right school catchment, or near work or near friends, or it's an apartment that you really love everything about it, but you identify that there is a particular issue. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to compromise and live with it?
It's funny you say that. My sister lives in Italy, right? She lives in a place in the north which is known for its rice growing. Rice requires lots of basically fields full of water. What happens when you got fields full of water? Mozzies. So the whole place is a mozzie fest. You can't avoid it there, right? So everybody's got fly screens. Everyone's got coils everywhere. Everyone's got those zapper things you plug in. Everyone, right? So it's something that if you were moving to that area and you think, oh, what a beautiful place this is in winter, that might be a rude shock. I reckon if you wake up in summer, what the hell? They come in plague proportions.
So you still want to be there. You just want to know the information before you get there.
That's it. Known rude shocks.
Known rude shocks. Love that.
All right. The next one is tourist and location shifts. Talking about Italy anyway. But no, we're back to Australia now.
Yeah, look, it's another seasonal factor. Tourism. If you're buying near a beach, it's a quiet street, you loved it in winter, but, that could turn into a traffic jam in summer. Of course, we'd love to live near the beach, and some first home buyers do have that opportunity. They might go regional. They might go to a small beach town. Parking then becomes impossible. Cafes are packed. You might find it's not really quite the peaceful oasis that you would imagine. So you just got to keep that in mind. If you're looking at something in winter, then there'll be a summer impact. If you're looking at something in summer and it's a tourism-oriented area and you're thinking, this is so alive and I love the vibe and there's so many people around, really just think about what happens in winter. Are you able to deal with the quietness of not having all of those people around when they're not there?
Well, that's the thing, because you really do need to think about what you want from your neighbourhood year round. It's not just the house, it's the lifestyle that changes with the seasons, Again, I was only watching Foreign Correspondent last night, and there was a whole episode on Barcelona and Ibiza. And, they are tourist towns, and now there's a lot of protests against the sheer weight of tourism and the impact that that's having in those areas. So, that's at a grander scale, I guess, but it happens with your little sleepy seaside towns along the coast of Australia as well, to a smaller degree, and it does really change things. And I know that, you hear a lot of people up in Byron Bay, for example, the locals resentful of tourists. So you got to be mindful of that. And if you do go in there in summer thinking, this is great, I love it, love it, love it, and in winter it's quiet and you hate it, that's one thing. But also if you go in winter thinking, I love it, so peaceful, so relaxing, can't wait for summer, then you think, hang on a minute, every man his dog's up here. and I don't like sharing it, that you've got to be thinking about that.
Yeah, you got to think about year round. Now, it's not just the house, it's the lifestyle that changes with the seasons as well.
Exactly
and that
right.
brings us on to heating, cooling and insulation. So let's talk about running costs. If you're buying summer, you're probably more focused on how hot it gets and whether there's air conditioning. But come winter, you could be shocked at how freezing cold it is. Cost of heating and eating is high at the moment. Without proper insulation, you'll be pouring money into energy bills that just feel uncomfortable. Now, I know personally, I use my air conditioning in my home, that our long-time listeners followed my journey of my renovation of my home. And one of the things that luxuries that I was able to put in was ducted air conditioning, and it can heat and cool. I use my air conditioning maybe 2 or 3 weeks in summer. It's a home that has nice natural breezes. The airflow is really good, but I actually use it more in winter because Queenslanders are really, really, really hard to heat. So that's something that I was aware of, I was conscious of, and I know that it costs me more to heat my home in winter.
Which makes me laugh because you keep telling me how warm it is up there. But anyway.
Not for the 3 weeks of winter, Veronica.
But,
It was 10 degrees this morning.
We do often, when we're looking at a property in one season, we're not often thinking about the things that set us up for success in other seasons, that's for sure. And we do talk about checking for insulation. Now, it's hard to know, are the walls insulated? Right? Now, if you've got a weatherboard home like you do, I'm presuming you put insulation in when you did that. And certainly when I did my upstairs extension and clad the house, I've got insulation in the walls as well, right? But how do you know that? How do you know that when you're buying a house that you didn't renovate? And even in the type of insulation you've got in the ceilings, there's very minimal or none, right through to really quite expensive and extensive insulation. So they can turn what would be a cold house in winter into quite snug and doesn't cost a lot of money to heat. Or in summer, conversely, if you've got an upstairs room that's got bugger all insulation, faces north or west, it's going to be hot as hell in summer. You are going to always be running the air conditioning. So these are important things to think about, but it's quite difficult to even sometimes work out whether or not that house does have that behind the walls. Ceiling fans are a great thing to have. External shading, and certainly if you're in a cold climate, double glazing windows can be helpful, but external shading in a hot climate to stop the sun hitting the glass. These are all things that will reduce your running costs and will actually make your home a hell of a lot more comfortable to live in. And so it makes it more affordable and comfortable. And you can retrofit insulation or double glazing, but it's expensive. I think it's a great thing to go in with your eyes wide open and understanding what you're signing up for and what to look for to make sure that that home is going to be comfortable in other seasons than the one you're looking at buying in.
Yeah, and what can you fix and what can't you fix? Because you can put really heavy curtains on a big window or big door, sliding door, that can help with the insulation. So there are things you can do. You just got to have your eyes wide open and say, all right, well, can I live with this? Can I fix it to some degree? Will it have a huge impact on my resale? Because remember, capital growth does matter.
And increasingly, people are becoming more and more aware of the livability and comfort, but also running costs of homes. So that is changing. And in fact, what is coming in is a rating system. It's an energy rating system for homes. And that will ultimately come in and be something that is every single house that goes on the market in this country at some point is going to have a score. So as buyers, we're going to be better informed around this. But until that comes in, we can arm ourselves with information right now.
Knowledge is power. Absolutely. So if you take one thing away from today, it's this. Don't just buy for the season you're standing in. Imagine the property throughout the whole year and think about how it will perform. That's how you avoid nasty surprises once you move in.
And if you're thinking, well, there's a lot more to this than I realise, you're not alone. And most first home buyers really don't know what to look for until it's too late, which is one of the reasons that we created the First Home Buyer course. We take you step by step through everything you need to consider. So you don't just buy a house, you're buying the right house and you're sort of not making they're actually very avoidable mistakes. We can save you from that.
Yeah, or you go into it knowing what the issues are, and that's what we want you to do. Nothing is perfect. It's finding the perfectly imperfect.
Imperfectly perfect.
Or imperfectly perfect. Jump online, check it out. Make sure you're not caught out by the seasons, because a home should be a place that you love year round, not just when the weather's nice.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Your First Home Buyer Guide, and we shall see you next week.
Too many first home buyers are leaving money on the table and hurting their future selves because they don't know how to do things in the right order. That's what we do. We teach you the exact steps you need to take and support you along the way.
We help you move from a state of information overload to feeling excited and in control. You'll learn a clear step-by-step process that takes the guesswork out of buying your first home. You'll know exactly what to look for, who to talk to, and how to navigate every stage with confidence, avoiding costly rookie mistakes along the way.
We've created your first home buyer course, a 10-module self-paced course plus online mentoring. Now, the course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us every week. You can share the link of any property you're thinking of buying and we can help you work out whether it's an A, B or C grade or a no-go zone. We even help guide you through your negotiations.
Trust us, you will buy a hell of a lot better with our guidance and you'll overpay a lot more than the cost of the course if you don't know what you're doing.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to join our Facebook group. It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions, which we will answer, meaning you can make sure that you're not getting led down the garden path. We hope to see you there soon.